The Last of Us 2. Masterpiece or failure? Now, depending on who you talk to, it would seem both are true. Likely to be considered one of the most polarizing and divisive pieces of media in history. Now, how can a game that is objectively high quality, a technical achievement, beautiful detail, some incredible set pieces, visceral enemy encounters, intelligent AI, incredibly polished stealth and combat, all the fun kills, so many fun ways to kill in this game, and without question the best voice acting and motion capture in the business? How can a game with these obvious positive qualities still elicit such a polarizing reaction? Well, it all comes down to expectation. The Last of Us 1, the elephant in the room, while juggling a few heady themes, didn't truly challenge its players. Certainly, there may have been some resistance to a few of the choices that our main characters made throughout, but at the end of the game, most players were on board with how it all played out, thinking, internally at least, they would probably have made all the same choices that our protagonists made. Went on to become a classic, instant 10 out of 10 success game of the year. Why it's important to challenge expectation. Neil Druckmann, half of the directing and writing team for the first game and the sole director and creative force behind the sequel, and the rest of his creative team at Naughty Dog have intentionally and willfully taken everything you wanted or expected from a traditional and safe narrative and thrown it in the trash. Naughty Dog, Neil and his team were fully aware the effect this story would have on some of its potential audience, but I believe it was a portion of their audience they wanted to dispense with. Everybody that played The Last of Us 1 had an idea in their heads, an interpretation of the world and characters. And especially in a subjective art medium like this, maybe our interpretation of a world and its characters aren't always in line with what the artist intended. This can be a good thing. With The Last of Us 1, it managed to accidentally rope in a whole lot of people that it wasn't really aiming at. You formed an ambiguous story. The audience makes their own interpretation of it, and maybe some of the themes and ambiguous morality get lost along the way. What was it? What did some of us get wrong? And here's what people have trouble with. You aren't the creator. Interpret and infer their meaning and intention all you will. As an observer, as a player, a viewer, our interpretation is unfortunately not important. You don't get a say in what you think a character meant or would do in a situation. And Neil Druckmann and the team at Naughty Dog have made that absolutely clear. They are not beholden to their audience. You're along for the ride or not. And yet it's astounding how it seems people think they understand this world and characters better than their creator, but I digress. Let's start with the assertions that Joel, Ellie, and the story from the first game were hopeful and positive and even relatable or heroic, while the second game has been perceived more as hopeless, negative, and oh yes, while the first game only opened your mind to the idea of this dark, grim, and hopeless world, the sequel absolutely doubled down on the formula, much to the shock of many players. And you aren't alone here. A great number of fans to the original felt estranged by the continuation of this story because they expected something and didn't get it. That is where I see the biggest hurdle this game had to surmount, and it's not with the plot, story, or character motivations of either game, it's with the mass application of expectation in a world that has been fundamentally misunderstood. This world is grim, and it always was. The glorification of Joel as a hero and the previous game's plot points being perceived as positive and hopeful is the biggest problem this new game had to contend with. Now, it's not that we shouldn't have hope, not that there aren't positive themes to gleam in the misery of either of these two games, but when the end of the original Last of Us rolled around, many were thinking that Joel and Ellie won the game. They were the protagonists. They defeated the bad guys, and they won. Joel is not a good guy. Joel is a monster, plain and simple. Surely, his character is endearing, even lovable as a protagonist, but many of his choices and the ending of the first game are an unmitigated atrocity, and perceiving Joel as heroic was never supposed to happen. Any sequel that just told more adventures of Joel and Ellie, where these horrific events had no consequence, would be a disastrous choice, dismantling the incredible depth and desperation that this world embodies. But people still wanted it. That was their take on the first game, and despite how clear it was to some of us, this theme of moral ambiguity, others still carried these incorrect expectations. Neil and Naughty Dog corrected this the only way they could, by doubling down, so there could be no further confusion. This is a world of horror, grief, guilt, and misery. Actions have consequences, there's no happy endings, and Joel got what he deserved. When you understand that as an audience and when the creators have that freedom, it goes to a deeper and more evocative place than any expectations could have led. That is why you intentionally divide a fan base, because doing what is safe and expected will get you nowhere. Characters are killed but are just brought back anyway. The same derivative story tropes are used on us over and over again because they worked before. It's all just so safe. Creators are too scared of their audience nowadays to do anything shocking or new with a beloved character or franchise. When the stakes are high, when as an audience you have no way of knowing which of your favorite characters will live or die, the tension during and relief after each action sequence hits so much harder. If there is no real risk, then the tension is entirely artificial. These are the moments that stick with us. More than a movie or a book could ever affect you, losing a character that you played as, if it's earned, if it's believable, and most of all, if it means something. There may be nothing quite so deeply evocative. The Last of Us 2 is bold and brazen and shocking, and for the target audience, it reaches a depth of character and emotion beyond anything they could have achieved if they were trying to please everyone. Now, because I know these will get brought up in the comments, let's address a few of the more common misgivings and criticisms of the sequel's story. Now, before I get to the more legitimate criticisms, I am rightfully dismissing a couple right out the gate. A forced agenda. The theory that gender, sexuality, or identity have any weight or influence on this story or its quality. Just their presence or existence or reference to them is not an agenda. The topics are subtle and handled with complete class and restraint, if they're even mentioned or focused on at all. Any perceived agenda is solely the projected insecurities and ingrained ignorance of a childish group of humans that refuse to grow up. And that the public and critic reception of this game and the critical acclaim that it has received is due to some sort of payout from Sony or Naughty Dog. It's insulting, reductive, and a little too convenient to make a baseless assumption that when an opinion contradictory to your own is shared by so many that it's gotta be a conspiracy. No, none of these reviewers got paid. Sometimes people just like a thing you don't. Number 1. Tommy and Joel get lost, but Abby doesn't. I don't know where they're getting this. Tommy and Joel don't get lost. They stick their necks out to save a girl in trouble while on patrol. This isn't out of character, and frankly, it's half the reason they even do these patrols. A huge snowstorm, a horde of runners. They have no reason to believe this girl is ambushing them, and they hardly have time to even think about it or second guess things. They're aware of the Baldwin estate, they know that it's plausible to fortify that property, and they all but lead her there themselves. It's clear they aren't lost. The audience may know not to trust her at this point, but Tommy and Joel really have no reason not to. There is no plot hole here. Number 2, Joel wouldn't trust these strangers and get ambushed in the first place. All right, first of all, it really doesn't look like he trusted them. From the moment they closed those gates, you can see in his eyes how nervous. Even the wolves at first seem confused by the coincidence here. This is far more of a perfect storm of bad luck than it is a plot hole. Also, at this point in the story, Joel is well established to be trying to be more vulnerable and trusting ever since meeting Ellie. That's the whole character arc. Even in the first game, Joel lets his guard down a number of times. Then you add the fact that Joel has now had 4 years in a much more relaxed environment where trusting strangers and having to rely on others is far more commonplace. There is no plot hole here. Number 3, Isaac doesn't listen to Abby about Lev. Abby, at this point, is already a rogue soldier, gone AWOL for I think 2.5, 3 days against Isaac's orders. And then Isaac finds out that she's harboring a Seraphite, while there has been no shortage of explanation that Isaac is a hateful racist that tortures Seraphites, and he had no reason at this point to listen to Abby when it's clear that she has gone against his orders to befriend and harbor their most hated enemy. No, it's absolutely in character for Isaac to not listen to Abby at this point. Definitely not a plot hole. Number 4, Dina offering Ellie her mask. Dina is an incredibly giving and caring person. She sees that Ellie might be at risk from breathing spores, and she is ready and willing to give her life to protect Ellie. This is amazing, this moment. She's not thinking, that's the point. She is an empathetic and passionate character, and making what could be an irrational choice for love, that's not a plot hole, that's a very believable and human character choice. Number 6, letting Ellie and Tommy go. We know by the end of the game, after playing as Abby for 10+ hours, that she isn't a monster. She's haunted by the untimely death of her father. Surely her hate for Joel has consumed her, and she believes that exacting revenge on the one man that brought her such pain will finally give her rest. So that's what she does. She didn't come to Jackson to kill anyone else. Not to mention, back in Seattle, she has a literal army in a stadium surrounding and protecting her at all times. She's not in a position of vulnerability. Leaving Tommy and Ellie alive was not a plot hole. Perhaps as a character choice, it lacked a bit of foresight, but it was absolutely in keeping with Abby's character, trying to be a good person and do the right thing. That is well established, and it rings true in this moment. That is not a plot hole. Number 7. How is Abby so big? That's unrealistic. Give me a break. The criticism that there's no way Abby, given 4 years and direct access to a professional athletic gym and stadium, and being in a constant rotation of militarized training, they even give you a year-by-year update of her progress. It's absolutely credible, set up, and in fact contextually quite probable that any woman or man committed enough could absolutely have these sorts of gains. Not to mention, holy shit, anyone that doesn't think this is super badass is an idiot. Number 8. Ellie letting Abby go. After playing this game for 25 hours and learning everything that you do, for anyone paying even the slightest bit of attention, the choice to let Abby live at the very end was the only way that Ellie could move on with her life. Killing her would prove that she learned nothing and hasn't grown as a character, and anyone with any empathy or humanity that is watching that final fight should be exhausted by all of this hate and pain and rage and be internally pleading that they both walk away and let it go. She didn't just decide to let Abby go. She, at that moment, decides to forgive Joel. That was the true burden on her heart. That is why she kept having nightmares. He died before she could forgive him. If you genuinely played this game for the whole 25-hour campaign and you still wanted Ellie to kill Abby at the end, seriously, what the fuck? Not a plot hole. 9. The last big criticism that people seem to have with this story is that Ellie was ever upset with Joel in the first place, who not only murdered dozens of good people that only wanted to cure all humanity, but also to have lied to her about it and took from her what was built up as being the very meaning of her existence, a sacrifice that she wanted to make, and then being forced to carry that burden on her shoulders for the rest of her life, knowing that she could have saved millions, watching your friends and family die every day of an affliction that you had the power to stop. For the millions that allowed themselves to truly absorb these stories without ego or expectation and let the creators and artists involved take you on this journey, there is no other way it could have played out. But for many others, the realization that these characters were flawed, that this world had serious, realistic consequences, was just too far from the expectations they had built up in their heads. The hardest thing to admit as a thinking, feeling person is that you have been passed by. That what others perceive as a truly enjoyable experience was just never meant for you. Now, most people seem fairly on board for the first half of the story. You like Joel, you like Ellie, you hate Abby for taking Joel away. You want revenge right alongside Ellie. It's a relatively smooth path up that arc, right to the climax at the theater, and then it takes a turn. You were just at the climax and suddenly you're doing it all again, 3 days in the past. Nothing's really happening even. It's just a bunch of fetch quests. Now, while I agree, her story was indeed framed as a tangent from Ellie's more primary story. And while the story points, or the things that happen, aren't immediately clear on their importance or the connection to the whole, there is still the very obvious separation here between story and plot. The things that happen are story points, and yes, if you're listing them all verbatim like this, it's going to make them sound fetch questy and unimportant, but that is only possible if you have been actively ignoring the plot. Plot and story are not the same. Abby, like Ellie, has lost her way. Her father was taken from her. We are shown how this destroyed her, affected her every choice, for years ruined her relationships, estranged her from her friends and comrades and loved ones, and upon actually achieving revenge, received no solace from her nightmares. But it's how Abby deals with these new factors that separates her story from her plot and separates her revenge tale from that of Ellie's. It's only when Abby again starts making choices to help others, finding vicarious hope through these new characters, then and only then can she finally put her father to rest and allow herself to love and forgive. That is the plot. And yes, this is challenging. Suddenly, at the climax, ask of your audience to now walk a mile in the shoes of the villain. I mean, holy shit, this is interesting, this is unique, and it's giving us a reason to see a bunch of different set pieces that you didn't the first time through, different places in Seattle. Not to mention the opportunity for clever interweaving of plots and moments when something is set up in Ellie's playthrough and then it pays off 10 hours later during Abby's playthrough. That is insanely cool. But why? Why stop at the climax and go back and do the whole thing again from a different perspective? Why not just go back and forth throughout until both characters reach this shared climax at the same time? Like, look how cool this is when you line them up like this. So many reviews and criticisms cite this as being what really ruined it for them, but that is exactly what makes this game so damn unique and interesting. That each of these stories plays out separately is an intrinsic component of making the theme and plot work. As Ellie, everything seems so clear. You work your way towards a single objective. As a player, you've already played the first game, you're completely on board with this from the first second. You loved Joel, and now you hate Abby for taking him from you. Right until the turning point, the confrontation in the theater. They set out to take you on this straightforward journey with full knowledge that cutting you off at the climax will be jarring as hell. That feeling you had was exactly the point. When you slowly begin to realize that your time as Abby will not be brief, that you have skills and weapon upgrades and 3 full days in Seattle to go through again as the fucking protagonist, you are griefed as a player. Now here is why this is way better. There are no villains. There are no heroes. Everybody has their own reasons and story, and it's not enough to just be told that your antagonist has their own motivations. You are being made now to play them. Resistant at first, of course, you were supposed to be, but you slowly fall in love with this new set of rich characters that just a few hours earlier you were happily killing them one after another in Ellie's storyline without remorse. And now suddenly you feel acute regret for the actions that you've already carried out, but there's no going back. You will kill all of these people. It's happened already, each with their own motivations and fears and insecurities. This is a mirror. Do you get it yet? These are the same arcs, but the first time up this hill, you wanted it, and the second time, you begin to dread it. Your relationship with Lev and Yara, your falling out with Owen and Mel, these aren't side quests. This is the aftermath of years of obsession and bad decisions, and guess what? You got more in common with Abby than you think. You hated her, she hates herself. And the only thing that pulls her out of this pit of self-loathing is finding this new sense of purpose and a chance to make a difference and do something, anything to make the world better. As a player and as Abby, all you want is for her and Ellie to move on. You start to see that this isn't just story points in a list, but a crucial and poignant reflection of everything we were made to think was so important in the first half of the game. Yes, she agrees to try and help Isaac as her only remaining father figure. She wants to find and help Owen as the closest thing to somebody that knows and understands and loves her. And then she wants to do anything she can to help Lev and Yara as a last effort to salvage her morality and self-worth. Abby isn't the bad guy. Ellie isn't the good guy. You were so excited to kill Abby's friends, and then suddenly Tommy is a freaking mini-boss, and you genuinely hate him by the end of that sniper sequence. And if you had just allowed yourself to experience this story as they intended, you aren't thinking about Joel or revenge anymore. You just want both of them to walk away. So here you are at the end of Abby's so-called fetch quests, and you find yourself looking down on the bodies of Owen and Mel. And you're feeling entirely responsible for their deaths, not just as Ellie when you played her, but now as Abby too, for dragging these poor wonderful characters into your self-created shitstorm. And now as Abby, you suddenly want to go back to the theater and kill Ellie. This is when the vision of Neil Druckmann finally comes full circle. That is the plot, not the list of things she did in the meantime. Now, unless you've been actively trying to ignore these themes, you have just been taken on a roller coaster of a story that has successfully brought you from one extreme to the other. And there is no way it would have been this effective if you'd been playing the separate plots chronologically. If you got to the theater and you still wanted Abby to die, if you felt ripped off by the final story ending because Ellie lets Abby go, then you haven't just missed the point, you've denied yourself one of the most profound gaming experiences ever achieved. This is why it's not a bad thing to divide your fan base. This is why you should never try to please everyone. Because if you aren't willing to take these huge risks, if you play it safe and you swim in the shallow end and you never dare to piss off some of your audience or make shocking and challenging choices, then you will never achieve the resonance and depth
that is possible when you aren't afraid to take risks.
At least whether you hated it or loved it, you were made to feel something, and that alone is worth applauding. Now let's be fair, maybe you just want a more traditional storyline, maybe the pacing didn't work for you, you weren't invested in some of the characters as much as others, and it's fine not to like something. It's okay not to like this game. It's divisive for a reason, but the public vitriol and rhetoric that this story is objectively bad, that it was poorly executed, that the pacing was terrible, please at least take this away. Your opinion or perception of a subjective art form is not a fact. And for the millions that got exactly what they wanted from this story, their experience is absolutely valid. And that's okay. Division isn't inherently bad. We can start to appreciate that some things just aren't for everyone. You shouldn't feel angry or offended that this story wasn't written with you in mind. At the end of the day, we could all learn a thing or two from Abby and Ellie. Revenge, hate, negativity. These feelings are like a dark blanket you can wrap yourself in. You feel slighted by this story leaving you behind, so you find comfort in that hate. You find other people that have the same feelings, and maybe to feel better, you take out these insecurities
on people that were just quietly and harmlessly enjoying something they love.
But all that really does is insulate you from understanding and empathizing with the perspectives and feelings of those that contradict us. Neil Druckmann and Naughty Dog had the courage to take a risk, and whether it landed for you or not, that's something you can't discourage. Division and having different experiences is what makes us human. We are all the protagonists of our own story. And sometimes the best choice you can make for the plot of your story is to take that hate and let it go.